He died on the wet subway steps, thinking of spilled coffee. He woke up on a stone floor in a stranger's body, facing a singing crystal. Around him, 50 girls in identical uniforms were afraid. They aren't afraid of the crystal. They're afraid that the crystal has lit up before a man for the first time in 120 years. A chill hits his knees before his consciousness returns. Jiyeon opens his eyes. A crystal the size of a man stands before him and sings, not with sound. The vibration travels through the floor and rises up his bones to the back of his neck. 50 pairs of eyes stare at him as if looking at a cockroach that suddenly started talking. The teacher on the right grips her cane so tightly her knuckles turn white. Her face looks like a cracked porcelain vase. In the back rows, someone drops a hairpin, and the sound echoes through the hall like a fallen sword. The crystal sings louder. The vibration changes its tone. It adjusts to his breathing. He doesn't understand where he is. He doesn't understand why he's wearing someone else's clothes, why the floor is stone and the ceiling vanishes into the darkness at the height of a 5-story building. But one thing strikes him immediately. Everyone in the hall is afraid. And they aren't afraid of the crystal. They're afraid of what the crystal is glowing at, the boy on his knees, the man. Jiyeon raises his head. In the front row stands a girl with silver hair and a gaze that makes the temperature drop 5 degrees. A badge glitters on her robe. Student Council President. She stares without blinking. Jiyeon does the only thing he knows how to do when he doesn't understand anything. He bows. In the Korean style. Her back at a 90-degree angle. 3 seconds in that position. She rises. Someone laughs nervously. The president doesn't blink. The crystal sings even louder, and cracks of light race across its surface. A teacher with a vase-like face steps forward and strikes the floor with her staff. Silence falls on the hall like a slab. She speaks, and her voice grinds against the stone. Celestia's introductory crystal makes no mistakes. Over 300 years, it has rejected thousands of candidates and accepted only the worthy. Today, for the first time in 120 years, it has lit up before a man, and she has no idea what to do with it. The last words of thee are quieter. There is no anger in them. There is the bewilderment of a man who has believed in the system his whole life, and the system has failed. Jiyeon listens. The words are foreign. The language is unfamiliar, but he understands every word, and that frightens him most of all. Crystal didn't just accept him. Crystal implanted the language of this world directly into his head like a file that unpacks upon opening. Foreign words settle as a new layer over his native Korean. The grammar resembles Latin mixed with something tonal. He can speak. The question is whether he should. The teacher asks his name. He answers, Han Jiyeon. She asks again. He repeats more slowly. She frowns. She's never heard that name before. She asks which house he's from. He doesn't know what a house is, but the crystal prompts him. Houses. Great magical families. Lines of power passed down through blood. He belongs to none of them. He replies that he has no house. The hall rustles. 50 girls exchange glances. A man without lineage. And the crystal glows. 3 impossibilities in one person. The president tilts his head slightly. A microscopic movement. Jiyeon catches it. She looks at him without contempt. She looks with interest, and that is more dangerous. The professor declares the ceremony over. The case will be referred to the academic council for review. Until a decision is made, he remains under observation. He will be assigned a room. She utters the word room with such an intonation that everything is clear. It will not be a room. 2 female guards in light armor lead him out. The corridors are wide and high. The ceilings are covered in frescoes. Women in shining robes stand above battlefields. There are no men in the frescoes, not a single one. Jiyeon counts the turns. Left, right, down the stairs, down some more. The air grows damp. The walls are bare. The stone is cold. 1 floor down. They lead him to a dark wooden door. A guard swings it open and nods inside. The room turns out to be a former storage room. Someone hastily ripped out the shelves and shoved in a narrow bed. The mattress is thinner than the palm of his hand. In the corner, a table with a candle. No windows. Jiyeon enters. The door slams shut. He sits down. The mattress creaks pitifully. He looks at his hands. They're not his. Younger, thinner. There's a scar on his right palm that wasn't there before. He closes his eyes and clings to the last remnants of his former life. Wet subway steps. His foot slips. His temple smashes into the railing. A cup of coffee flies from his hand. His last thought was about coffee. How silly. He opens his eyes. The storage room is there. So it wasn't a dream. So he died and ended up here. In a world where magic exists as a system, not as a bureaucracy with licenses. To an academy where not a single guy has been in 120 years. To a windowless room on the basement level. He collapses onto his back. The ceiling is low. The stone is green in 3 places. Mold or moss, or magical mold. He doesn't care. He's so sleepy that even fear recedes. He closes his eyes. The crystal is still singing. Far away, upstairs, through 7 floors of stone. But Jiyeon hears it. The vibration doesn't travel through the air. It travels through that part of his consciousness that, in a past life, broke down incantations into their constituent elements. The crystal sings, and its song is a structure, a complex one, a multi-layered one. Jiyeon hears at least 14 nested formulas in it, and 3 are written with errors. He falls asleep with this thought. 3 errors in the crystal's song. Someone wrote them in at some point, on purpose or not. But Jiyeon already sees them as text, and the lyrics need editing. Morning came without light. In a windowless room, the difference between night and day could only be determined by sound. Footsteps echoed upstairs, hundreds of feet on stone. The academy was waking up. Jiyeon sat up in bed and discovered that someone had slipped an envelope under the door during the night. Thick paper. A seal with the academy's coat of arms. Inside was a schedule, the weekly timetable. All classes were marked for him as electives with the notation, Observer. He was allowed to attend. Not to participate, to attend. Like furniture is allowed to stand in a lecture hall. Below, in small handwriting, was a note. The dining hall on the 1st floor is open from 6 to 8. Uniform required. The uniform was lying on a chair. He hadn't noticed it the night before. Gray. Not white like the girls in the hall. Gray. The color of the service staff. Jiyeon got dressed. The uniform fit almost perfectly, a little wide in the shoulders. He climbed the stairs to the 1st floor, and the smell of food hit his nose so hard that his stomach clenched into a fist. The dining hall was huge. Long tables made of dark wood, benches, tall windows through which morning light poured in, real light. Jiyeon in the doorway and squinted for a second. After the windowless storage room, the light felt physically heavy. He walked in. The dining hall was half empty, early birds. Girls in white uniforms sat in groups of 3 or 5. The chatter died down when he appeared. Not all conversations, just the ones closer to the door. A wave of silence swept through the dining hall like ripples on water. By the time he reached the serving line, the entire room was silent. The woman behind the counter looked at his gray uniform, then at his face, then back at the uniform. She served him porridge, bread, a glass of water. The portion was half the size of the girls in front of him. Jiyeon didn't argue. He took the tray and went to find a seat. All the tables were taken. Not physically, psychologically. At every table sat girls who were staring at him in such a way that sitting down next to them would mean starting a war. He found a spot in the farthest corner, a small table by the wall. On it stood a vase with a withered flower. The table was clearly unused. Jiyeon sat down. He ate the porridge. The porridge was bland but hot. In his situation, hot food was a luxury. He chewed the bread and looked around the dining hall. Not at the people, at the walls. There were runes on the walls, protective spells woven into the stone. He saw them as text, long chains of symbols running from floor to ceiling. Most were standard: structural reinforcement, thermal insulation, fire suppression. But one formula stretched across the entire east wall, and Jiyeon couldn't read it in its entirety. It was too long, and part of the symbols was hidden behind a tapestry. He memorized what he saw and began mentally analyzing the structure. 14 clusters in the visible section. 3 of them were redundant. 1 contained a tautology. Someone had once written this formula in a hurry, or copied someone else's without fully understanding the original. His thoughts were interrupted by a sound. A tray was set down on the table across from him. Jiyeon looked up, silver hair, an icy gaze. The council president's insignia. Sylvia Einhart sat down across from him as if she did this every day. There was only tea on her tray. She wasn't eating. She hadn't come to eat. She had come to evaluate. Jiyeon understood this immediately. He had seen people like this in his past life. Research supervisors who come to a defense not to listen but to measure. She was silent. He was silent. The silence lasted 20 seconds. 30. A minute. The dining hall around them hummed with whispers. The council president is sitting with a boy. The council president is sitting with a rootless boy in a gray uniform. The council president is drinking tea at a table with a withered flower. Jiyeon finished his water. He looked at her tea. The water was too hot. The steeping time was too long. The leaves had released bitterness. He could tell by the color. In his past life, his only hobby besides his dissertation had been tea. He told her the tea was overbrewed. He said that if the water temperature had been 10 degrees lower and the steeping time half a minute shorter, the flavor would have unfolded without bitterness. She looked at him. For the first time, her expression changed. Not much, microscopically. One eyebrow rose a millimeter. She asked if he knew who she was. He replied that he did. President of the council, the insignia on her robe. She asked if he knew what the House of Ice meant. He replied that he didn't. She stood up, took the tray, left, without saying another word. Jiyeon watched her go, her back straight as a ruler, her stride steady, not a single superfluous movement. He had seen people like that. People so tired of keeping up appearances that they had forgotten what rest looked like. He put away his tray and went to his first class. The lecture hall was an amphitheater, tiered rows in a semicircle, the lectern at the bottom. An elderly female instructor stood at the lectern, drawing a glowing formula in the air. A basic elemental construct, fire. Jiyeon sat in the back row. People glanced at him. Whispers. More whispers. He wasn't listening. He was staring at the formula. The teacher drew it slowly. Each symbol flashed in the air and lingered. By the end, she had formed a structure of 23 symbols, a standard fire pulse, first-year course, beginner level. Jiyeon saw 4 extra symbols in this formula. They didn't cause any harm, but they slowed the cast by half a second and increased mana consumption by 12%. He didn't say anything. An observer doesn't speak. Furniture doesn't speak. He jotted it down in the margins of the schedule. 4 symbols. Without them, the formula worked more cleanly. He checked it mentally 3 times. The result didn't change. The instructor offered the students a practice session. One by one, the girls stepped up to the lectern and fired a fire pulse at the target. The target stood 20 paces away. Most hit it. Some missed. One girl with dark hair and a stethoscope around her neck stepped forward, and her pulse was the weakest in the class. It barely reached the target and fizzled out before getting there. The girls behind her giggled. The dark-haired girl returned to her seat with a blank expression. But Jiyeon noticed how she clenched her hands under the table. Stethoscope. Healer. Her power is honed for something else. A fire pulse is to her what hammering a nail with a sledgehammer is to a surgeon, the wrong tool. Jiyeon committed her to memory. Dark hair, stethoscope, a weak flame, something else, powerful. The class was over. He left the lecture hall and walked down the hallway. He needed the library. In his past life, when he didn't understand what was happening, he would go to the library. In this life, the principle hadn't changed. The Celestia Library occupied an entire tower, 5 floors of books, scrolls, stone tablets, crystalline media in which information was stored like frozen light. Jiyeon entered, and the smell of old paper and magical dust hit his nose. The librarian looked at his gray uniform and opened her mouth. Then she closed it. Then she opened it again. She said that staff access was limited to the first floor. He didn't argue. The first floor held thousands of volumes. That would be enough for a start. He found a shelf with the Academy's charter, a heavy volume in a leather binding. He sat down at a table in the corner, opened it, and began to read. Celestia's charter was written like a spell. Every article contained a magical binding. Every clause had a formulaic basis. It wasn't just a set of rules. It was a functioning magical document that held the Academy together as a structure. And Jiyeon read it like a musical score, article by article, clause by clause. By evening, he had reached Article 47 and stopped. Clause 3. The Duel Contract. An ancient mechanism, unused for 200 years. The winner specifies one favor. The loser is obligated to fulfill it. Magically bound. Cannot be broken. Jiyeon read the clause 3 times. Then he closed the book. Then he opened it again. Then he smiled slowly. Not out of joy, out of recognition. He knew this type of construction. In his past life, it was called a loophole in the technical specifications. He returned to the storage room, lay down on the thin mattress, pulled out from under the pillow the schedule containing his notes for the day. 4 extra symbols in the fire pulse, 3 errors in the crystal song, 1 article in the charter that everyone had forgotten. The first day in the new world, not bad. On the second day, there was a new lock on the storeroom door. Heavy, metal, with a protection rune fused into the core. Jiyeon crouched down and examined the rune. Fine workmanship. The Ice School, House of Ice. He didn't stop to wonder why the council president would put a lock on the door of the boys' storage room. He simply accepted the fact. Someone believed his door needed to be locked more securely, either to protect him or to keep him from running away. Both options meant he was important, and importance in this place meant survival. He went to dining hall. The same porridge, the same small portion, the same spot by the wall. But this time, the withered flower in the vase had been replaced with a fresh one, white, odorless. Someone had switched the flower between dinner and breakfast. Jiyeon didn't know who, but he knew that in an academy where every gesture is a message, a fresh flower on an outcast's table is either an act of mercy or a declaration of war. He ate his porridge and went to class. Day 2. Theory of Magical Constructions. The instructor was just like yesterday, dark-haired, stern. She drew the formula for a protective barrier in the air and explained how it worked. The barrier was built on 3 pillars. Each pillar was a separate formula. The 3 formulas wove together into a single structure that formed a dome. Jiyeon watched and saw a musical score. 3 melodies, 3 voices, a choir. And in this choir, the second voice was off-key. Not by much, just a fraction of a tone, but it was off. The connection between the second and third pillars contained an excess element that created a micro-vibration. The barrier was working, but it was humming, quietly, at a frequency most mages couldn't hear. But someone could hear it. Someone sensitive, someone like a healer. Jiyeon looked out into the hall. A dark-haired girl with a stethoscope was sitting 3 rows away from him, wincing. Every time the instructor activated the formula, the girl would flinch ever so slightly. She could hear the hum. It caused her pain. Microscopic, constant, chronic. Jiyeon jotted this down in the margins. After class, he went to the library, the first floor, the statute. Today, he was looking for something else. History. The Edict of the Moon. A document signed 120 years ago after the War of the Tyrants. Men are forbidden from studying at the higher academies. Male magic is too destructive. Male archmages turned the Middle Lands into the Ashen Wastes. Jiyeon read and felt a familiar aftertaste. The taste of a document written by the victors. There was truth in every phrase. And there was a flaw in every phrase. Male magic is destructive. But why? Was it not because men were taught only destruction? The archmages led to catastrophe. But who funded their research? Who directed them? Who handed them weapons and then was surprised when they fired? The document did not answer these questions. It was written so as not to answer them. Jiyeon turned the page. At the end of the edict was a seal, magical, alive. It was still pulsing with a dim light. He read it like a spell. The seal contained 12 symbols. He recognized 11. The 12th was unfamiliar to him. A symbol without a category. No school. No connection to known magical systems. It pulsed at a frequency that resembled a crystal's song. Jiyeon memorized its shape and returned the book to the shelf. By the evening of the third day, he had established a routine. Morning, porridge, classes, observation, library until dark, storage room, sleep, repeat. He was a piece of furniture and he used that to his advantage. Furniture is invisible. Furniture can stand in the corner of a lecture hall and watch as the professor writes out a formula. Furniture can hear students discussing homework in the hallway. Furniture can sit in the library until closing time and no one will ask why. By the end of the first week, Jiyeon had 14 pages of notes, errors in formulas, inefficient combinations, extra symbols, redundancies, outdated constructions that had been passed down from textbook to textbook for 300 years because no one had reread the original. He wasn't going to show this to anyone, not yet. Right now, he was gathering information. Like a graduate student before a literature review, read everything first, then think. On the 7th day, Sylvia came to see him in the library. She didn't sit across from him. She stood next to his desk and placed a sheet of paper in front of him. On the sheet was a formula, a complex one, a layered one. Jiyeon looked at it and realized it was a bill, not a magical formula, a legal one. But in this world, a legal formula was magical. Every word carried weight. Every sentence was a bond. Sylvia said she had been working on this document for 2 years. That it was meant to open access to the academy for scholarship students from outside the houses. That she had rewritten it 11 times, and each time the Council of the Old Houses had found a technical reason to reject it. She wasn't asking for his help. She was stating a fact, like placing a queen on the board, without asking the pawn's opinion. Jiyeon looked at the document. He read the first 3 lines. There was an extra clause in the first line. He spotted it in 4 seconds. The phrase was grammatically correct, but created a double meaning. It was precisely this ambiguity that the old houses used every time as a formal excuse for rejection. He looked up at Sylvia. She was waiting. Her face was icy. Her back was straight. But he saw the shadows under her eyes. Purple. Deep. She hadn't slept for at least 2 days. He said he saw the problem. Said there was an extra element in the first line. Said that if he removed it, the double meaning would disappear, and there would be nothing to formally nitpick about. She was silent for 3 seconds. Then she took the sheet of paper. Then she turned toward the exit. Halfway there, she stopped. Without turning around, she asked how he brewed that tea. Oolong with pear, he answered. Water temperature 85 degrees. The pear thinly sliced. Steep for no more than 2 minutes. She left. The next morning, there was a teapot on his table in the dining room. Hot. Next to it, an unsigned note. 85 degrees, 2 minutes. Jiyeon poured himself some tea. He took a sip. The temperature was right, the time was right, but the pear was sliced too thick. He smiled. The perfect Sylvia Einhart. Council president, heir to the House of Ice. 20 years old, 2 years of work on the bill, 11 drafts, and she doesn't know how to slice a pear thinly. He finished his tea and went to class. Somewhere above, the crystal was singing. Quieter than on the first day, but Jiyeon heard a new note. The 14th layer. The crystal had added something, or removed it. The structure was changing, slowly, as if the crystal were adjusting itself. To whom? In the third week, a summons arrived, an official one. The seal of the House of Fire, scarlet wax. The wording was as polite as a poisoned candy. Miss So Hyun, fourth-year heiress of the House of Fire, invites observer Han Ji-yeon to an exhibition sparring match for the purpose of demonstrating the Academy's traditions. Refusal is permitted. But. The word "but" at the end of the invitation was a separate sentence. Jiyeon read it twice. An exhibition sparring match, not a duel. Sparring. The difference is that sparring does not fall under Article 47. No contract, no obligations. Just a public beating that looks like a lesson. He could have refused, but refusal in this system meant confirmation. The boy was scared. The boy is weak. The boy has no right to be here. He accepted. The Celestia training ground was located in the courtyard between the third and fourth towers. An open space. A stone floor with runes that absorbed excess energy. Bleachers around the perimeter. On sparring day, the bleachers were full. 300 people, maybe more. The news that the heiress of the House of Fire would be teaching the boy his place had spread throughout the academy in 2 hours. Jiyeon stepped onto the training ground in a uniform. So Hyun stood on the opposite side. Tall, red hair tied in a ponytail. Eyes the color of molten copper, the House of Fire's battle robe, red and gold. She was beautiful with a beauty that warned of danger, like a flame, like a poisonous flower. She looked at him and smiled. The smile was condescending, like an adult looking at a child who has grabbed his father's sword. The judge announced the start. Hyun raised her hand. Jiyeon saw the spell begin to form in the air around her fingers. He read it in real time, symbol by symbol, link by link. A fiery structure, an ancestral one, ancient, passed down from mother to daughter in the House of Fire. 7 scarlet petals. 7 fiery discs forming an arc. Each disc is a separate formula woven with the other 6 into a single structure. Beautiful, truly beautiful, like a symphony. But, in the third beat, there was an extra syllable. Jiyeon saw it immediately. A single symbol, small, insignificant at first glance. But this symbol created a feedback loop that returned part of the energy to the caster's hand. Not like a blow, like a burn. Slow, chronic. Every casting of the 7 scarlet petals left a mark on the hand palm of the one who cast them. Years of casting, years of burns. Hyun released the petals. 7 discs flew in an arc. Red, bright. The air vibrated with heat. The stands gasped. Jiyeon stood still. He didn't move. He was counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 seconds for the full formation. 7 seconds during which he read the entire pattern from the first symbol to the last. He raised his hand, opened his mouth, and he spoke the formula. The very same one, symbol by symbol, link by link, but without the extra syllable in the third beat. 6 scarlet petals flared before his palm and flew toward the 7. 6 met 6. Fire collided with fire. Annihilation. An explosion of heat and light. The runes on the training ground floor glowed, absorbing the energy. And the 7th petal, the original one, the last of Hyun's 7. It curved around the collision and flew onward. toward her. Jiyeon didn't stop it. He intercepted it, changed its trajectory with a single short impulse. The petal froze in the air above Hayoon's right shoulder, without touching, hanging, like a red lantern. The training ground was silent. Hayoon stood motionless. Her eyes were wide open. Above her shoulder, her own petal burned, aimed at her neck, and it didn't move. Jiyeon lowered his hand. He looked at her. He could have said nothing, could have bowed and left. That would have been safer. But he saw her right palm. She held it slightly differently than her left. Defensively, out of habit, for years. He told her there was an extra syllable in the third beat. That because of that syllable, the spell lost about 18% of its power and left a burn on her palm after casting. Told her that if she removed that syllable, it would be cleaner. Told her he wasn't claiming her ancestral style. He said he just thought it looked like it hurt her to cast it. The silence was so thick it felt solid. Hayoon slowly lowered her gaze to her right palm. She opened it. There was a scar on her palm, an old one, white at the edges, pink in the center. A scar she had hidden for years, under gloves, under bandages, under a camouflage spell that cost her another 20 mana points a day. A scar from her own ancestral spell. She looked at her palm. Then she raised her eyes to him. There was no malice in those eyes, no shame. There was something else. Something Jiyeon saw in the mirror every time a reviewer found a mistake in his work. A mixture of horror and relief. Horror that someone had seen. Relief that now she didn't have to hide it. The petal above her shoulder went out, quietly, like a candle. Hayoon turned and left the training ground, at a brisk pace, not running, but close. 300 people in the stands were silent. Then they all started talking at once. The noise rose like a wave. Jiyeon stood in the center of the training ground in a gray staff uniform, alone. He looked at the stands. Sylvia was sitting in the front row. She wasn't clapping. She wasn't speaking. She was just looking at him. And for the first time in the 3 days he'd seen her, she blinked. Next to Sylvia sat a dark-haired girl with a stethoscope. So-A, the healer. She pressed her palms to her chest, and her face wore an expression Jiyeon couldn't read. Not horror. Not admiration. Hope. Small. Fragile. Like the first sprout through a crack in the stone. He bowed to the training ground. In the Korean style. Deeply. He turned and left. Behind him, the crystal in the central tower sang so loudly that the glass in the third-floor windows trembled. 3 days had passed since the sparring match, and the academy was not in half. Into pieces. Factions sprang up like cracks in glass. Some believed that the boy in the gray uniform had publicly humiliated the heiress of the House of Fire. Others believed he had saved her from her own spell. Still others couldn't decide and were angry at both sides. In the hallways, people gave Jiyeon a wide berth, some with contempt, some with fear, and a few people, very few, with curiosity. On the 4th day after the sparring match, an envelope was waiting for him in the dining hall. Not on the table, under the tray, hidden, unsealed, unsigned. Inside was a slip of paper with a formula, a fire formula, an ancestral one, 7 scarlet petals, the full version. Next to the third line was a pencil circle around that very syllable, and a signature consisting of a single word. Thank you. Hayoon had sent him her ancestral formula, the complete one, the forbidden one, the one passed down only within the house. It was either a gesture of gratitude or a gesture of trust, or a suicidal act from the perspective of house politics. Most likely all three. Jiyeon tucked the slip of paper into his pocket and didn't take it out again in front of witnesses. That same evening, there was a knock at his storage room. Quiet, polite, 3 even knocks. He opened the door. So Ayan was standing on the threshold, dark hair, a stethoscope, a book pressed to her chest. She said she had come to give him her notes on the theory of magical constructs. She said she had noticed he was writing in the margins of his schedule and that it was inconvenient. The notes were neat, calligraphic handwriting, colored markings, every formula redrawn with comments. The work of a straight-A student who spends 3 times as much time on her notes as necessary because doing things perfectly is the only thing she knows how to do. Jiyeon took the notes. He thanked her. She stood in the doorway. She didn't leave. He waited. She was silent. 10 seconds. 20. Then she spoke. She said she had a headache. She said it hurt every day. For 4 years now. She said she was a healer and that she treated everyone at the academy. Bruises, burns, fractures, magical exhaustion. Everyone. But she can't heal her own head. Her healing spell doesn't work on herself. She's tried, hundreds of times. The spell requires directing the power outward, toward the patient. It's physically impossible to turn it on herself, like trying to bite your own elbow. She said this quietly, quickly, like someone who's used to not being listened to until the end. Like someone who's used to their problems not being considered problems because they solve them for others themselves. Jiyeon listened. He didn't interrupt. When she finished, he asked her to show him the formula. She raised her hands, and a healing structure unfolded between her palms. A green glow, soft, warm, a beautiful formula. Jiyeon read it like a musical score. 28 symbols, 6 clusters, 2 cores, a unidirectional flow of power, from the inside out. He saw the author's logic. The formula was written by someone who believed that a healer is a tool, that a healer exists for others, that the direction is always the same, from oneself to them. An elegant formula, cruel in its elegance, because the author did not foresee that the instrument breaks too. Jiyeon stared at the formula for 2 minutes. Then he found a spot, between the 4th and 5th bonds, a gap, small, like a pause between words. You could fit 1 word into that pause. 1. He asked her to repeat the formula. She repeated it. He asked again. She repeated it. The 3rd time he told her what to add. 1 symbol. Between the 4th and 5th links. A symbol that signified a connection. In the context of the formula, it changed the meaning of the flow. It was, heal them. It became, heal them and yourself. Ayeon looked at him, then at her hands, then at him again. She raised her palms, activated the formula with the added symbol. A green glow flared up. The flow went outward, as always. But this time, part of the flow turned back, gently, like a river finding its old bed. The glow touched her temples. She closed her eyes. 4 years of pain, 4 years of daily migraines, 4 years of healing everyone around her and being unable to heal herself. The glow lasted 7 seconds, then it faded. Ayeon opened her eyes. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, quietly, soundlessly. She didn't cover her face. She didn't turn away. She just stood there and cried like a person who had finally exhaled after holding her breath for 4 years. Jiyeon stood there, not knowing what to do. In his past life, he hadn't known what to do when people cried either. He handed her the notes back, just so she'd have hold in her hands. She took them, pressed them to her chest, stood there for another 10 seconds. Then she said she'd bring him dinner, and left. An hour later, there was another knock on his door. Ayeon, with a tray. On the tray was a full dinner. Not porridge, meat, vegetables, bread and butter, hot tea. She took the tray on the table and sat down on a chair, the only chair in the storage room. Jiyeon sat on the bed. They ate in silence. More precisely, he ate. She drank tea and watched him eat. There was an expression on her face that he couldn't quite place. Not gratitude, not affection. Silence. The inner silence of a person whose head isn't aching for the first time in years. She left when he finished eating. She took the tray with her. The next evening she came again, with dinner. And the next. And the next. By the end of the week, Jiyeon had stopped going to the cafeteria for dinner. There was no point. Ayeon brought it to him. Every time, a little more than he needed. Every time, with tea. Every time, in silence. He didn't ask why. She didn't explain. Along with the dinners, something else happened. On the 5th day after the sparring session at the training ground, Jiyeon was summoned to the vice-chancellor's office. An office on the 6th floor of the main tower, a panoramic window, a view of all 7 towers. Seated at the table was a woman in her 50s with a stern face and the Order of the Silver Moon on her chest. She said she had received 17 complaints from representatives of the houses regarding the incident at the training ground. She said that the House of Fire demanded an apology for insulting ancestral magic. She said that the Council of Elders was considering his immediate expulsion. Jiyeon listened. She finished. He asked if a formal complaint had been filed through the charter. She said no. The complaints were verbal. He asked if there was a clause in the charter prohibiting an observer from participating in voluntary sparring. She paused. No, there was no such clause. The sparring was voluntary. Hayoon had initiated it. Formally, Jiyeon hadn't violated a single clause. The vice-rector looked at him for a long time. Then she said he was a dangerous young man, not because he was strong, because he was observant. She let him go. He left the office and ran into Sylvia in the hallway. She was standing by the wall, waiting. Not for him, just standing there. But when he came out, she looked at him and said one word: Wednesday. He didn't understand. She repeated it. Wednesday, 4 o'clock, the library. Then she left. Jiyeon stood in the hallway and thought, Wednesday, 4 o'clock, the library. It was an invitation, or an order, or a schedule, or all of the above. On Wednesday at 4, he went to the library. Sylvia was sitting at a table in the far corner. Her bill lay in front of her, the new version, the 12th draft. She had removed the extra conjunction from the first line. The document looked cleaner, but 2 new problems had appeared in the 2nd and 5th lines. Jiyeon sat down. He looked. He found them. He pointed them out. She wrote them down. They worked in silence for 2 hours. When they finished, she gathered her papers and took a thermos out of her bag. Tea. Oolong with pear. The pear was sliced thinner than last time. Not perfect, but thinner. She poured 2 cups. They drank in silence. 2 hours of work and tea. Not a single unnecessary word. Jiyeon thought this was the most pleasant thing that had ever happened to him in this world. A quiet hour with a person who demands nothing from you except competence. Sylvia finished her tea. She stood up, packed up the thermos, and left. She stopped at the library door. Without turning around, she said, "Next Wednesday at the same time." Jiyeon nodded, although she couldn't see his nod. But for some reason he was sure she knew. The 2nd month in Celestia began with a crash. The library doors swung open so hard the hinges groaned. Jiyeon looked up from his book and saw a girl. Black hair with a purple sheen, skin pale to the point of blue, golden eyes with vertical pupils, a barely perceptible flicker on her forehead just above the hairline. An illusion. She was hiding something beneath it. Horns. He didn't know where this certainty came from, but the crystal in the tower clinked softly, barely audible, and Jiyeon understood. Demon blood. The girl walked across the entire hall without looking at the librarian, without looking at the rule signs, without looking at anyone. She approached his desk, pulled out a chair, sat down, put her feet up on the desk, heeled boots. Soles covered in dust, right on top of his notes. She said her name was Raven Kale Moore, daughter of the Demon Lord of the Western Realms. On an exchange program. She said she'd heard of him. The boy who reads magic. She said she wanted him to read hers. Jiyeon looked at his notes under her boots, then at her, then back at the notes. He asked her to take her feet off the table. She smirked. The smirk was like a blade, thin, dangerous. She said she wasn't used to being told what to do. He replied that the notes under her soles were 3 days' work and that the dust from her boots had smudged 2 paragraphs. She looked down. Then she slowly took her feet off. No apology, but she did it. Jiyeon smoothed out the papers. 2 paragraphs were indeed ruined. He sighed and looked at her. She was waiting. His eyes were golden and unblinking. There was something animalistic in them. Not cruelty, hunger. Not physical. Something else. He asked her to show him her magic. She raised her right hand, and the air around her fingers trembled. The spell began to take shape. No, not take shape. The spell was bursting out, like a beast from a cage. Chaotic streams of energy twisted together without any visible structure, a black flame with violet streaks. The librarian behind the counter screamed. The protective runes on the walls flared up. Raven smiled. Jiyeon watched, not at the flames, at the structure. And he saw it. Beneath the chaos, beneath the jagged streams and black fire, beneath all this outward madness, there was a system, neat, precise, constructed with surgical precision, but built on a foundation that Jiyeon recognized instantly: pain. The foundation of every link in her magic was pain, not a metaphor, literally. Every symbol in her formula was activated by a pain impulse. Someone had taught her to cast spells through suffering. Someone had made pain the ignition key for every spell. Jiyeon extinguished the flame with a single word, a neutralizing formula, simple, first-year stuff. Raven flinched. Her golden eyes widened. No one had ever extinguished her magic so easily before, not because she was weak, because everyone was afraid to approach her. He told her that her magic wasn't based on chaos, that it was based on very precise pain disguised as chaos. He asked who had taught her that. Raven was silent for a second. 5, 10, 30, a minute, 2 minutes. The golden eyes didn't blink. The smirk vanished. Her face went blank. Not icy like Sylvia's, blank like a room from which all the furniture had been removed. She was silent for 2 minutes, and Jiyeon didn't break the silence. He waited, the way one waits for a wounded animal to decide whether to trust or run. She stood up, silently. She left. The library door closed quietly behind her. It didn't slam. Quietly. That was scarier than if it had slammed. The librarian peeked out from behind the counter. Her hands were shaking. Jiyeon went back to his notes. He had to rewrite 2 smudged paragraphs. Raven didn't come the next day, or the day after that, or the day after that. Jiyeon didn't look for her. On the 5th day, she appeared again, in the library, in the same chair, without her boots on the table. She placed a stone tile the size of a palm in front of him. A formula was burned into the tile. Demonic, ancient, symbols Jiyeon hadn't seen in academic textbooks. She said it was her father's basic spell, the one he'd taught her at age 7, the one that started it all. Jiyeon took the tile. He read the formula for half an hour. Demonic grammar differed from academic grammar just as spoken language differs from literary language. Rougher, more direct, fewer decorative elements, more raw power. And at the heart of the formula, where an academic spell would have a neutral activator, stood a symbol of pain, intentionally, consciously. Whoever wrote this formula knew what they were doing. They used a child's pain as fuel. Jiyeon placed the tile on the table. She looked at Raven. Raven was looking away. Her golden eyes were moist. She wasn't crying, but she was on the verge. He said he could rewrite it, said the activator could be replaced, not with emptiness, with another impulse, any impulse, a heartbeat, a breath, a movement, anything but pain. She asked why. He didn't understand the question. She repeated it. Why did he need this? What did he want in return? He replied that he wanted nothing, that a formula with a pain activator was like writing with a pen that pricks your finger with every word. It's possible, but pointless. She looked at him for a long time. Then she said that he was either the smartest person she'd ever met or the dumbest. He replied that usually both options were true at the same time. She snorted. She almost laughed. Almost. They worked until the library closed. He was breaking down the formula. She was explaining the demonic grammar. By midnight, he had 3 options for replacing the activator. The most elegant one used the rhythm of breathing. Inhale is accumulation. Exhale is the cast. Simple, natural, painless. He wrote the formula on a piece of paper and handed it to her. She took it. She stood up, turned toward the exit, stopped at the threshold, said she'd give it a try, and left. The next morning in the dining hall, Jiyeon found a paper bag on his table. Inside were buns, 4 of them, warm, with cinnamon. No note, no signature, but the buns smelled of something other than cinnamon, something sharp, demonic, like smoke from a violet flame. He ate all 4. They were better than porridge, much better. That same day, during his evening rounds of the library, he heard a sound coming from the roof of the south tower. Quiet, rhythmic, breathing. Inhale, exhale, and on the exhale, a soft flash of black flame. No roar, no chaos, no pain. Raven Kale Moore, the Demon Lord's daughter. For the first time in her life, she cast a spell that didn't cause her suffering. Jiyeon didn't climb onto the roof. He didn't look. It was her moment, not his. He returned to the storeroom. Aeon was standing in the doorway with a tray. Dinner, just like every evening. She looked at his face and asked why he was smiling. He said it was just a good day. She didn't believe him, but she didn't ask. They ate dinner in silence. Outside the window, where there was no crystal, he sang quietly and evenly. The 15th layer of the formula. Jiyeon could hear him clearly. The structure continued to change. The 4th month. Morning. The dining hall. Jiyeon sat at his table by the wall drinking tea, oolong with pear. Sylvia had learned to slice the pear thinly. The thermos sat on the table every morning. No notes, no signature. It just sat there. Next to the thermos lay a paper bag with buns from Raven, also unsigned, also every morning. Aeon came with dinner in the evening. The schedule had fallen into place on its own. Mornings from Sylvia and Raven, evenings from Aeon, Wednesdays at the library. Jiyeon didn't ask. They didn't explain. The system worked. On this day, the system malfunctioned. Jiyeon took his first sip of tea and tasted something. Bitter. Not from the tea leaves. Something else. Chemical. He froze, the cup halfway to his mouth. The graduate student's brain worked faster than his instinct. The bitterness wasn't typical of oolong. An oily film on the surface that hadn't been there yesterday. The liquid's temperature was lower than usual. Someone had opened the thermos after Sylvia. Someone had added something. He set the glass down, slowly, without spilling a drop. He looked up. The dining hall hummed with the usual morning noise. No one was looking his way, too intently. In the far corner sat a group of upper-class women with windhouse patches. One of them turned her head slightly in his direction and immediately looked away. Too quickly. Jiyeon stood up. He picked up the thermos and the glass. He headed for the exit. At the door, he bumped into Aeon. She was on her way to breakfast, a book in one hand, a stethoscope around her neck, sleepy eyes. She looked at his face and saw something. She asked what had happened. He held out the glass to her, asked her to smell it. She brought the glass to her face, inhaled sharply, and turned pale. A healer identifies poison faster than an alchemist. A nose attuned to illness and pain picks up chemical anomalies like a tuning fork catches a false note. She said it was moonvine root. Not lethal, but combined with a hot liquid, it destroys magical channels. slowly, irreversibly. After a month of regular intake, the mage ceases to be a mage, forever. Someone didn't want to kill him. Someone wanted to erase his abilities, quietly, gradually, so that he wouldn't realize why he was growing weaker. Aeon grabbed his arm, dragged him to the medical wing. On the way, she checked his magical channels. One sip. He'd taken only one. The damage was minimal, reversible. She treated him for 2 hours. Her hands glowed green. A new formula, with an added symbol. She was healing him and herself at the same time, because the stress had given her a headache, and now she could fix it. While she worked, Jiyeon thought. The thermos sat on his desk. Sylvia leaves it there until 6 in the morning. The dining hall opens at 6. Between 6 and 7, when he arrives, anyone has time to come to the table. House of Wind, seniors, patches. Who's behind them? House of Wind is part of the Old Houses coalition. The Old Houses want to get rid of him. Not with their own hands, with their daughter's hands, cleanly, academically, without a trace. He told Ayan. She listened in silence. Then she said she would tell Sylvia. He asked her not to tell. Ayan looked at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Anger. Quiet. Deep. The anger of a healer who sees a wound and knows who inflicted it. She said she would tell. That it wasn't up for discussion. He didn't argue. By evening, Sylvia came to his storage room, for the first time. She stood in the doorway and looked around the room, at the walls covered in greenish moss, at the bed with its thin mattress, at the table piled high with notes, at the lack of a window. She was silent for a minute. Then she said that starting tomorrow, his table in the dining hall would be under surveillance, that she would sort it out, that the House of Wind would answer, not to him, to her. Jiyeon said thank you. She didn't accept his thanks. She turned and left. Footsteps climbing the stone staircase. Quick, hard. He knew that rhythm of footsteps. That's how a person walks who is going to and has already decided how. The next day, 3 upper-class women from the House of Wind were summoned to the disciplinary council. The day after that, 2 of them left the academy. The third remained. But she was demoted and transferred to the service wing. Jiyeon didn't know the details. Sylvia didn't tell him. She didn't mention that incident again, as if it had never happened. But from that day on, the thermos didn't sit on the table but in a locked cabinet next to the food station. Only Jiyeon and Sylvia had the key. She handed him the key on Wednesday, in the library, silently. She placed it on the table between their cups. He took it. She nodded. They continued working on the bill. The 13th draft. Cleaner, stronger, closer to the finish. Somewhere between the wording of the 3rd and 5th points, the tea started tasting better. Or maybe Jiyeon had become more attentive to the taste. When you know that someone tried to poison your tea, every subsequent sip that isn't poison becomes a gift. A small thing. But in his position, small things were everything. By the end of the 4th month, Jiyeon had mapped it out. Not a geographical one, a political one. He saw the balance of power at the academy as clearly as he saw formulas, factions, connections, redundant elements. The Council of the Old Houses, House Storm, Lady Velmyra Reinhold, 60 years old, head of the faction. She didn't come to the academy in person, but her influence reached through the daughters and granddaughters of the houses. Poisoning was her style, not brute force. Surgical removal of the problem. She sincerely believed that Jiyeon was dangerous, not because he was a man, because he reads. 120 years ago, someone else had already learned to read magic. His name was Yoon, and the world nearly collapsed. Lady Velmyra remembered. She had seen Yoon when she was young. She had seen what he had done. And now she saw Yoon's shadow in the boy from the storeroom. Her fear was justified. Her methods were repulsive. Jiyeon wrote her name in his notebook. He circled it. Next to it, he wrote, "Not an enemy, a frightened person." Frightened people are more dangerous than enemies, but frightened people can be calmed if you know what they're afraid of. He knew. Lady Velmyra was afraid that history would repeat itself. So he needed to show her that history could unfold differently. Not through force, through text, through a single, properly removed bundle. The 6th month. Night. The roof of the South Tower. Jiyeon couldn't sleep and went up via the service staircase Raven had shown him. It was cold on the roof. The wind carried the scent of pine needles from the northern forests beyond the academy walls. The stars were unfamiliar. Not a single familiar constellation. 6 months in a foreign world and he was still looking up at the sky, searching for the Big Dipper. He couldn't find it. A girl was sitting on the edge of the roof. Red hair, short, a choppy cut, tattoos on her wrists, dark symbols that glowed a dull silver. She was casting a spell, quietly, almost silently. Her lips moved, and with every word the air around her changed. It didn't become hot or cold. It became something else, as if reality itself around her was listening. Jiyeon stopped. He saw the formula. And this formula was unlike anything he had read in the library over the past 6 months. It wasn't made up of symbols. It was made up of names. Every element of the spell was a name: stone, wind, cold. Not a description of properties, a name, a direct appeal to the essence of the thing, the magic of the name, the forbidden school. Destroyed by order of the Silver Moon. Chapter 80 years ago. All practitioners executed or imprisoned, all books burned, all formulas destroyed. And on the roof of the South Tower sat a girl, casting a spell just like that. She sensed his presence and turned around. Her eyes were green, wild, like a cat caught in a trap. She jumped to her feet. The spell crumbled. The silver symbols on her wrists faded. She stood at the edge of the roof and looked at him. There were 5 steps between them. She could jump. Not down, to the side, to the neighboring roof. He saw her legs tense. She was ready to run. He didn't move. He said he wasn't going to turn her in. She didn't believe him. He could see it. She didn't believe him for a second. 4 years at the academy, 3 expulsions, 3 returns, each time on a knife's edge, each time on the brink. She lived in a state of constant flight. Her mother was burned for that magic. She told him that. Not right away. After 10 minutes of silence on the roof, she said her name was Kasi Ryu. That her mother was one of the last bearers of the magic of the name. That the chapter had passed the sentence when Kasi was 12. That she remembers the smell. Jiyeon didn't ask what kind. He knew he had no right to that detail. Instead, he asked something else. He asked if he could look at her formula one more time. She laughed, nervously, maliciously. She asked why. To explain it in more detail. He said no. He said he'd noticed something in her construction. The invocation at the beginning of the formula. The direct naming. That is precisely what makes the spell formally forbidden. If you remove the invocation and replace it with an indirect reference, the formula ceases to be name magic according to the letter of the law. It works the same way. It does the same thing. But legally, it no longer a direct address to the essence. It is a descriptive construction. Legal. Kasi looked at him, mouth open, eyes wide. She said he was crazy. He agreed. They sat on the roof. He asked her to repeat the formula slowly. She repeated it. He read it, analyzed it. Name magic was beautiful, direct, honest. No decorative elements, no superfluous connections. A direct appeal to the nature of things. He understood why it had been banned, not because it was dangerous, because it was too simple, too effective, too democratic. Name magic didn't require a hereditary gift. It didn't require the blood of a great house. All you needed was to know the true name of a thing and be able to say it. Anyone could do it. Anyone. In a world built on a hereditary hierarchy, magic accessible to everyone is not a weapon. It is a revolution. He worked for 3 hours. Kasi explained nuances that weren't in any book because all the books had been burned. An oral tradition passed from mother to daughter, memory instead of a library. By dawn, they had 3 transcribed spells, formally legal, functionally identical. Kasi held the paper with the formulas, and her hands were shaking. Not from the cold. She looked at him and said that if this was a trick, she would kill him. Without magic, with her hands. He replied that he believed her. She laughed. This time not nervously, tiredly, like a person who had been running for a very long time and had finally stopped. She left the roof. Jiyeon stayed. Dawn painted the foreign sky in colors that had no names in Korean. Pink with silver, orange with lavender. He sat on the roof and thought about the woman who had been burned for knew the true names of things, about a girl who was 12 and who remembers the smell, about a world in which knowledge is a crime if that knowledge makes you equal to those at the top. Breakfast was waiting for him in the pantry. Jiyeon had brought it, earlier than usual. Next to the tray was a note. "I noticed you weren't there last night. Everything's fine." He ate and thought that in this world he now had people who noticed his absence. This was new. In his past life, only the cat had noticed his absence, and that was only because she hadn't been fed. The next night they met again on the roof, and the next. Over 2 weeks, Jiyeon transcribed 10 of Kasi's spells. Then everything she knew. Each one became formally legal. She could cast spells in front of witnesses, on the training ground, during the exam. For the first time in 4 years at the academy, Kasi Ryu could be herself without fearing she would be killed for it. On the first day, when she stepped onto the training ground and cast a spell in front of everyone, she stood up straight. Her back was straight. Her hands didn't tremble. The spell worked perfectly. The training ground was silent. The instructor checked the formation 3 times. Legal. There was neither joy nor triumph on Kasi's face. There was calm. The calm of a person who, for the first time in 4 years, sleeps without flinching at every sound. The 9th month. Winter. The Winter Solstice Ball. A mandatory event for all students and instructors. Jiyeon found out about the ball 3 weeks in advance and spent every day of those 3 weeks looking for a way to get out of it. He didn't find one. The regulations were binding. Absence was punishable by disciplinary action. For an observer of his status, a single disciplinary action could be grounds for expulsion. He went. Celestia's main hall was so beautifully decorated that Jiyeon forgot to breathe for a second. Ice sculptures hovered unsupported beneath the ceiling. Candles burned with a silvery flame. The floor reflected the light so that it seemed as though people were walking on a frozen lake. 7 chandeliers made of crystallized manna hung on chains that disappeared into the darkness of the vaulted ceiling. The music came not from an orchestra, but from the walls. Runes woven into the stone generated the sound, a formula. Jiyeon read it mechanically. 12 voices, 4 keys, 2 errors in the bass register that created a micro-dissonance. He could have corrected them. He didn't. He came in a gray uniform, the only man in the hall among 600 people, the only one in gray amid the white, gold, and scarlet. He stood by the wall and drank water. Not tea, not wine, water. After the poisoning incident, he didn't drink anything he hadn't poured himself. The hall was noisy, dancing, conversation, politics disguised as politeness. Representatives of the houses whirled in pairs, and every dance was a negotiation. Every turn was a concession or a demand. Jiyeon watched, like a piece of furniture. Sylvia stood on the opposite side of the hall, a white dress, silver hair pulled up, an icy gaze fixed on the crowd. No one was near her, a zone of alienation. President of the council, heiress of the House of Ice. No one approached her without an invitation. Raven danced alone. A black dress, violet glints. The illusion above the horns shimmered more intensely than usual. She moved in such a way that a circle of empty space formed around her. Not out of fear, out of hypnosis. It was impossible not to look at her. Aeon sat in the corner with a book. At the ball, with a book. Jiyeon smiled. Kasi stood on the second-floor balcony, twirling a silver coin between her fingers. She was bored. Yuna, a petite freshman, a scholarship student. He noticed her for the first time. A practical braid, glasses. The sleeves of her dress were too long, the wrong size. She stood alone by a column. No group, no house, no surname. She looked just as he had felt on his first day, like a cockroach in a butterfly hall. An announcement cut off the music. A representative of the old houses came on stage. An elderly woman, well-groomed. Her voice was as polite as a silk noose. She said that in honor of the holiday, and in the spirit of the Academy's traditions, she was inviting Celestia's guests to demonstrate their skill. A guest, not a student, not an observer, a guest. The word was chosen precisely. A guest has no rights. A guest must be polite. A guest cannot refuse the host. 600 heads turned toward him. Silence. Jiyeon set his glass of water on the windowsill. He stepped out of the shadows. He walked toward the stage. Footsteps on the mirrored floor. Every step was reflected below, and it seemed as though he was walking alongside his reflection. 2 Jiyeons, one above, one below. He stepped onto the stage. The representative of the old houses smiled. She asked him to demonstrate magic. Male magic. The very magic that nearly destroyed the world 120 years ago. The trap was perfect. If he showed a powerful spell, it would confirm that male magic is dangerous, a reason for extradition. If he showed a weak one, it would be humiliation. A boy who can't do anything, a reason for expulsion. If he showed nothing, it would be cowardice, a reason for contempt. 3 options, all losing ones. Jiyeon bowed to the hall. He took a folded sheet of paper from his pocket. The hall fell silent. He said he wouldn't cast a spell. He said he would read. A murmur rippled through the hall. He would read. What would he read? He unfolded the sheet. Nothing was written on it. The sheet was blank. He didn't need the text. He knew it by heart. 3 months in the library, every evening. He had studied Celestia's primary protective spell, the one that has held the Academy's walls for 300 years. The one woven into every stone of every tower. He read it in its entirety. He broke it down into its components. He put it back together, and now he recited it, out loud, not as a spell, as text, as a poem, like a score read by a conductor before an orchestra. He read and named every phrase, explained every turn, pointed out where the authors had found an elegant solution, where they had cut corners, where they had hidden beauty within technical necessity. He reached the 7th measure and stopped. The 7th measure, a phrase that had gone unnoticed for 300 years, because it didn't affect the function. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't superfluous. It was beautiful. Simply beautiful. 300 years ago, one of the composers inserted an element into the Academy's protective spell that served no function. It served aesthetics, like a stained glass window in a fortress wall, like the carving on a sword hilt. Unnecessary, but beautiful. The author knew no one would notice, and inserted it anyway, because he could. Because magic is not just a tool, it is also art. Jiyeon said this aloud, and the hall fell silent so that the crackling of the silver candles could be heard. The female instructors in the front rows froze. The old rector of Celestia, 80 years old. She still remembers Sylvia's grandfather. She sat in a chair in the center of the front row, small, frail, eyes like 2 shards of black glass. She slowly stood up. The chair creaked. The hall watched. The headmistress straightened up and bowed. To him, the boy in the gray uniform on stage. deeply, slowly, with respect that could not be feigned. The auditorium buzzed. Then people began to stand. Not everyone, not all at once, but row by row. Female professors, female students, even several representatives of the old houses. Not all of them, but many. Jiyeon stood on stage and saw the faces. Sylvia, front row, mouth slightly agape. For the first time in the 9 months he'd known her, her face expressed something other than control. Amazement. Raven, third row, golden eyes, moist. She wasn't clapping. She was looking at him the way one looks at a fire that for some reason doesn't burn. Aeon, in the corner, a book pressed to her chest, tears on her cheeks, silent. Kasi, the balcony, standing, hands on the railing, knuckles white, an expression on her face he had seen only once before. That first night on the roof, when she believed. Yuna, by the column, small, in a dress that was too long. She wasn't crying, she was writing, on a napkin, every word he said. Jiyeon folded the blank sheet, put it in his pocket, bowed, in the Korean style, deeply, said he apologized for the disturbance, and left the stage. Behind him, the Celestia crystal in the central tower sang so loudly that the wine in the glasses trembled. After the ball, Jiyeon's world changed. Not immediately, gradually, like water wearing away stone. The first sign. His gray uniform was taken away. In its place, they brought a white one, a standard student uniform, without the house insignia, without the crest, but white. The order came from the rector personally, a note on official letterhead, one line. Observer Han is transferred to the status of special student, uniform to match, special auditor. The new status did not exist in the charter. The rector created it for him. One person, one status. The second sign. He was moved out of the storage room. The new room was on the 3rd floor of the East Tower, small, but with a window. The window looked out onto the courtyard. In the morning, light streamed through it, real light. Jiyeon stood by the window for 10 minutes and just looked. 6 months without a window. 6 months without dawn. He didn't know he missed the light until he saw it again. The third sign. The female students began to arrive. Not all of them, not in a crowd. One by one, with spells, basic ones, training spells, experimental ones, broken ones. They came to him as one might go to a repair shop, shyly, with apologies, with formulas rolled into tubes. The first was a sophomore from the House of Water. Her barrier spell was letting moisture through on the left flank. She'd been struggling for 6 months. Her instructor told her to practice more. Jiyeon looked at the formula. He found an extra knot in the third support. He removed it. The barrier stopped leaking. The second one came a day later. A 4th-year student. Fire school. Not from Hyun House. Another house. Her offensive spell was overheating her wrist. Jiyeon found a feedback loop, similar to the one in the 7 crimson petals. He cut it out. Her wrist stopped overheating. The 3rd, the 5th, the 10th. By the end of the first week after the ball, 12 female students had come to him. By the end of the second, 23. He started a notebook. He wrote down every formula, every correction, every result. The work was familiar. In his past life, he had sat in a lab just like this, dissecting other people's spell formulas. Only there, it was called scientific research. Here, it was called a miracle. A difference in context. Yuna Park appeared in the 3rd week. He had noticed her notes before, in the margins of a library book, small handwriting, ink smudges. But the content was brilliant. A note on page 412, the articulation of runic chains, a theory that runic combinations could be optimized not element by element, but in clusters, in groups, like words in a sentence. Not every letter separately, but whole words. This changed everything. If the theory was correct, the speed of spell optimization increased exponentially. Jiyeon found Yuna in the library. She was sitting at the farthest table, small, a pigtail, glasses, ink-stained sleeves. In front of her lay a stack of books as tall as her head. He approached. She looked up, frightened, wary, like a little animal caught stealing nuts. He said he'd read her note, on page 412. He said it was the best thing he'd read about the articulation of runic ligatures all year. She stopped breathing, literally. Her chest froze. Her eyes behind her glasses widened. He said he wanted to offer her a co-authorship, a joint project, her theory and his practical analytical framework. Together, they could test the hypothesis of cluster optimization on real formulas. Yuna looked at him. Then she took off her glasses, then put them back on, then took them off again. Then she began to cry, quietly, like a yawn, soundlessly. Tears streamed down her cheeks and dripped onto the open book. She cried, and Jiyeon didn't rush her. He waited, just as he had waited for Raven in the library, just as he had waited for Kasi on the roof. She wiped her eyes with her sleeve. The ink smudged across her cheek. She said that her works had never been hers, that every time she wrote something worthwhile, her mentor took it and published it under the name of the heiress of the house her mentor served. 3 works in 2 years, all someone else's, all under other people's names. She said she had stopped believing that anyone would ever mention her by name in the context of her own work. Jiyeon took out a blank sheet of paper. He wrote at the top, "Cluster optimization of runic combinations, methodology and preliminary analysis." Below that, Yuna Park, Han Jiyeon. Her name first, his second. She looked at the sheet, then at him, then at the sheet. She signed it. Her hand was shaking, but the signature was clear. They worked until the library closed, then another 2 hours in his room. Yuna turned out to be quick, quicker than he expected. Her brain didn't work like his, not sequentially, in parallel. She saw several combinations at once and found clusters intuitively. Where he needed 5 minutes of analysis, she needed 30 seconds of a glance. By midnight, they had the first chapter, a rough draft, raw, but workable. Yuna went back to her dorm. She stopped at the threshold, turned around, said she'd come tomorrow, if possible. He said it was possible. She nodded, left. Her footsteps down the hallway were light, almost silent. The footsteps of someone accustomed to being invisible. But she walked quickly, like someone who has somewhere to hurry to. For the first time, Jiyeon closed the door, sat down at the table, looked at the draft. Yuna Park, Han Jiyeon. 2 names on 1 sheet. In a world where names are everything, where a surname determines your fate, where without a house, you're just a piece of furniture. 2 outcasts had written their first joint work. He smiled, went to bed. Crystal sang, another layer. The 16th. The structure was getting more complex, but Jiyeon heard something new in it. Not a mistake, not beauty, a question. The crystal was asking, quietly, patiently, like a teacher who has set a task and is waiting. Jiyeon didn't know the answer yet, but he heard the question. And that was the beginning. The first year was coming to an end, and Jiyeon had become infrastructure, not a person, not a student, not a hero. Infrastructure, like a water pipe, like a foundation, something without which the academy could no longer function as it had before. The rector signed an order creating the position of technical advisor to the student council. The position hadn't existed until that day, just like the status of special auditor, just like everything else concerning Jiyeon at this academy. The world had no ready-made categories for him, and each time a new one had to be created. He officially became a technical advisor. Unofficially, 43 female students came to him regularly, each with her own formulas, each with her own breakdown. He kept track in a notebook that had swelled to 140 pages. Corrections, optimizations, rewritten combinations, removed tautologies. Each entry began with a name and ended with a result. Second-year student from the House of Water. Barrier. Superfluous link. Removed. Efficiency plus 22%. Fourth-year student. Offensive formula. Reverse loop. Removed. Overheating gone. First-year student from outside the house. Basic fire impulse. 4 extra symbols that have been taught for 300 years. Removed. Mana consumption down 12%. It was a repair shop. Quiet. Operating without a sign. But everyone knew where it was. A room on the 3rd floor of the East Tower. The door is always open until 10 p.m. Tea on the table. Schedule on the wall. Monday and Thursday. Formula consultations. Wednesday. Working with Sylvia on the bill. 14th draft. Almost ready. Friday. Working with Yuna. The research was progressing. Cluster optimization was working. The theory was being confirmed in practice. They tested the hypothesis on 32 formulas, and in 29 cases, the cluster approach yielded an efficiency gain of 8 to 31%. Yuna was writing so fast that her pen smoked. Her brain was finally working at full capacity, and that capacity was enough for 3 people. Evenings. Dinner with Aeon. Every day. She brought food. He brewed tea. They sat in silence. Sometimes they spoke. About formulas. About patience. About how the day had gone. Everyday conversations. Quiet. Warm. On the 5th such dinner in the 3rd week, she came in with 2 trays and said the second one was for her. He wasn't surprised. By then, it felt natural. Like breathing. Like dawn outside the window. She ate with him. Not across from him. Next to him. Shoulder to shoulder. He hadn't noticed when it had started. It was just that at some point she stopped sitting across the table and moved closer. And he didn't move away. Raven came without an appointment. She barged in, always. The door would swing open, and she'd be standing in the doorway with an expression that meant she was bored or angry or needed attention. More often than not, all 3 at once. She would sit on the windowsill, swing her legs, talk. A lot. About the Western realm, about her father, about demons, about how, as a child, she'd burned down half the garden because she couldn't control her power, and her father had punished her by making her restore the garden 1 plant at a time, by hand, without magic. She talked, and Jiyeon listened and worked. She spoke louder. He worked more quietly. A balance. Once, she fell silent in the middle of a sentence. He looked up. She was staring at him. Golden eyes, no smirk, no mask. She asked why he wasn't afraid of her. He replied that he was afraid. But not her magic. Her habit of slamming the door. It made his tea spill. She was silent for 3 seconds. Then she laughed. A real laugh. Not sharp, not piercing. Soft. It was the first time he'd heard that sound from her. Cassie came in through the window. Always. The door existed. Cassie ignored it. 3rd floor. The ledge. A jump. The windowsill. She appeared like a cat, silently. She sat down on the floor by the wall. She took out her formulas and worked. They worked side by side in silence for hours. Sometimes she asked. He answered. Sometimes he asked. She snapped back. Then she'd answer. That was their rhythm. One night she didn't come with formulas. She came with a bottle of something strong and 2 glasses. He didn't drink. She drank. She talked. About her mother. About that day. About the smell. About how a 12-year-old girl stood in the crowd and watched the only person who loved her burn. Jiyeon listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't comfort her. He didn't say everything would be okay. He just sat there and listened. When she finished, she was drunk. Not very drunk. Just enough to say what she wouldn't have said sober. She said that he was the only person she'd ever told this to. Not because she trusted him, but because when he looked at her, he didn't see a criminal. He saw a person. Just a person. She fell asleep on the floor of his room. He covered her with a blanket and lay down on the bed. In the morning, she left before dawn. An empty bottle and a note remained on the windowsill. "If you tell anyone, I'll kill you." He didn't tell anyone. Layla Vance appeared in his life during the last week of his first year. Captain of the combat faculty, blonde, a braid down to her waist, a swordswoman mage. She came to his office in the middle of the workday. She knocked. She entered. She stood in front of the desk, straight, stiff, military bearing. She said she had been at the ball, said she had heard his speech, said that ever since, she couldn't stop thinking about one thing. He asked what? She said she had won through strength her whole life, that she had been praised for her strength, that strength was all she knew, that strength was all that was valued in her, and that at the ball, he had beauty in a spell that had been considered merely a function for 300 years. And she understood that there was no beauty in her own fighting style, only strength, only efficiency, only results. She asked him to look, not to fix it, to look. He asked her to show him. She went out to the training ground that very day. She moved beautifully, objectively beautiful. Sword, magic, body, everything worked as a single mechanism. But Jiyeon saw the structure, and the structure was linear. Attack, block, counterattack. 3 movements. Repeat, like a formula with 3 links that works but doesn't breathe. He told her that her style was a hammer, effective, powerful. But a hammer has only one trajectory, downward. It can strike harder, but it can't strike any other way. And if the opponent knows the strike is coming from above, the force doesn't matter. He'll step aside. Layla listened. She didn't interrupt. He suggested reworking it, not the whole style, just one sequence, between the second and third movements, to add variation, not new power, a new direction. She tried. On the third attempt it worked. The strike didn't come from above, from the side, from below, diagonally. Same power, a different vector. She stood on the training ground and looked at her sword, then at her hands, then at him. She said that for the first time in her life, she felt she was winning not with her muscles, but with her mind, and that it was scarier than all her fights. He replied that fear was normal. It meant she was growing. She nodded, silently. She turned around. She left. The next day she returned, with questions. The day after that, too. By the end of the week, she was the 6th. 5 regulars, now 6. His room on the 3rd floor barely fit them all, but it did. The 2nd year. The Council of the Old Houses filed an official extradition request. The document arrived on Monday morning. The Council's seal. 6 signatures. 6 houses. The wording was flawless. Student Han Jiyeon is classified as a magical anomaly. Pursuant to paragraph 92 of the Silver Moon Codex, any magical anomaly is subject to seizure and investigation by the chapter. Seizure. Not an invitation, not a transfer. Seizure. Like an object, like an artifact, like an item. The hearing was scheduled for 7 days later. Public. 600 seats in the Great Hall. Live broadcast via magic mirror to all 7 towers. The old houses wanted a spectacle. They wanted to show the Academy that the boy in the white uniform was a temporary anomaly that the system would correct. Jiyeon found out on Monday. He had a week, 7 days, 168 hours. He started on Monday evening. He sat down at the table. He opened the charter. He opened the Silver Moon Codex, a copy of which he had begged the librarian for 3 months ago. He opened his notes, 140 pages, and he began to write. An amendment. Not a defense speech, not an appeal, not a plea for mercy. An amendment to the Academy's charter. Article 47, paragraph 3, the very one he had found on the first day, the duel contract. But not that one, next to it. Article 47, paragraph 4, definition of status. The wording had been written 300 years ago, and it contained a superfluous conjunction, A single word. A single word that created a double meaning. That word allowed any non-standard student to be classified as an anomaly. Remove the word, and the definition changed. An anomaly became a variation. An anomaly can be removed. A variation cannot. A variation is part of the norm, an expanded norm, but still the norm. He wrote for 7 nights. Sylvia came on Tuesday. He showed her the draft. She read for 20 minutes. Then she looked up. There was something in her eyes that he had seen once before. When the rector stood up and bowed to him at the ball, not astonishment, recognition. She recognized her own bill in his amendment. The same logic, the same method. Cut out the excess, keep what works. She said she'd help. They worked together 3 nights in a row. Sylvia slept 2 hours. He slept an hour and a half. Yuna joined them on Wednesday. Her cluster method came in handy. The amendment contained 17 clauses. Yuna found a way to reduce them to 12 without losing meaning. Cleaner, shorter, harder to dispute. Raven arrived on Thursday, not to help with the text, to guard it. She sat by the door to his room and stayed there all night. No one came in. No one tried. But she sat there, just in case. Jiyeon brought food 4 times a day. Not 3, 4. An extra tray appeared between lunch and dinner, with a note. Eat. Kasi came on Friday, with information. She'd been climbing rooftops for 3 days, listening. The magic of the name allowed her to hear conversations through walls if she knew the true name of the stone the wall was built from. She knew. She listened in on the old house's meetings, their strategy for the hearing, their arguments, their weak points. She brought it all, written down on paper, in small handwriting, 7 pages. Layla came on Saturday. She said she would stand next to him in the hall, not as a defender, as a witness. The captain of the combat faculty as a witness carries weight, political weight. He didn't ask, she offered. He accepted. Sunday, the day of the hearing, the great hall, 600 seats, all taken. Jiyeon stood backstage and breathed, evenly, deeply, just as Raven had learned to breathe when she cast without pain. Inhale, exhale. Her hands didn't tremble. A sheet in her pocket. 1, 12 bundles, 7 nights of work, 6 people, 1 amendment. He stepped onto the stage. The hall buzzed and fell silent. Lady Velma Reinhold sat in the front row. 60 years old, white hair, straight back, eyes like 2 shards of a stormy sky. She looked at him without hatred, with weariness, with confidence. She knew she would win. She had been winning for 20 years straight. The proceedings began. The council representative read the charges. Paragraph 92. Magical anomaly, subject to removal. The voice was even, professional. The legal machine ran without a hitch. Jiyeon was given the floor. He stepped up to the podium. He looked out at the hall. 600 faces. In the 4th row, Sylvia. Her face was icy, her hands folded in her lap. But the thumb of her right hand was trembling slightly. She was nervous. For the first time in his presence. Raven, in the 3rd row, golden eyes burning. Aeon next to her, a book on her lap, closed. For the first time in his memory, she wasn't reading. She was looking at him. Kasi in the gallery, feet on the back of the chair in front of her. Her face was calm, but the fingers on her wrists glinted silver, the magic of her name at the ready, just in case. Yuna, back row, notebook open, pen in hand, taking notes, as always. Layla, standing against the wall to the right of the stage, hands behind her back, military stance, a witness. Jiyeon took out a sheet of paper, 1, unfolded it, said he wouldn't make excuses, said he would read an amendment to the Academy's charter, Article 47, Paragraph 4, said he had found a superfluous clause in it, said that if it were removed, the charges against him would cease to exist legally. Not because he was innocent, but because charging him under this article was grammatically incorrect. He read. His voice was steady, calm, like a lecturer at a seminar. 12 clauses, one after another, each precise, each in its place. Not a single superfluous word. The courtroom listened. The silence was absolute. He finished, folded the sheet. 7 minutes. The counsel's lawyers leafed through the codes. 1, 2, 3. 5 lawyers bent over the texts, flipping through the pages. They cross-checked. The chief lawyer stood up after 7 minutes. He looked at Lady Velmyra. He looked at the room. He said that the amendment was technically correct, that the word creating a double meaning was indeed a superfluous element in the wording, that if it were removed, the definition of the anomaly would narrow and would not include Han Ji-yeon's case. He said that he was technically right. The room exhaled. Lady Velmyra closed her eyes, slowly, like someone who knew this day would come, but hoped it wouldn't. Sylvia on the presidential podium began to smile, slowly, like dawn. The first smile in all the time he'd known her. Not icy, warm. Raven laughed out loud, sharply, loudly. Her golden eyes sparkled. Aeon pressed the book to her chest, and tears streamed down her cheeks. Quiet. Familiar. Cassie in the gallery whistled, piercingly, to the entire hall. Yuna was writing it down, every word. The pen flew across the paper. Layla stood by the wall and looked at him. Her face bore an expression he'd seen on soldiers in movies when they found their commander. Not admiration, resolution. She had decided. The Crystal of Celestia began to sing, in all 7 towers at once. The walls hummed, the windows trembled. The magical mirrors broadcasting the performance transmitted the crystal's song to every corner of the academy. Every student, every teacher, every guard heard it. Jiyeon folded the letter, put it in his pocket, bowed, in the Korean style, deeply, back at a 90-degree angle, 3 seconds at the bottom, rise. He said he apologized for the disturbance, and left the stage. Second year, fall. The letter arrived in a silver envelope with a seal Jiyeon didn't recognize. A stylized hammer crossed out by a horizontal line. The Gray Hammer. A men's underground guild. Artisans, secretaries, former soldiers. Men to whom the Moon Edict had closed the path to magic 120 years ago. They knew about him. About the boy in Celestia. About the sparring. About the ball. About the hearing. They wanted to meet. Jiyeon read the letter and sensed a trap. Not a physical one, an ideological one. They wanted a banner, a symbol. A boy who had defeated the system. A boy who had proven that a man could. A boy who would become the face of the rebellion. He didn't want to be a banner. He wanted breakfast. But he went. The meeting was in the basement of a tavern outside the academy walls. Night. Cassie led him across the roof and along the ledges, over the wall, through the garden, through the gate that the guards didn't check on Thursdays. She knew the patrol schedule, 4 years of practice. 7 men were sitting in the basement. Men, aged 30 to 60, harsh faces, workers' hands. 1 blacksmith, judging by the burns on his forearms. 1 former soldier, judging by the scar across his left cheek. 1 secretary, judging by the ink stains on his fingers, just like Yuna's. Jiyeon couldn't classify the rest. Not enough data. The leader stood up, the blacksmith, broad-shouldered, bearded, a voice like an anvil. He said that the Gray Hammer had existed for 40 years, that there were 800 of them across the continent, that they had been waiting for this moment. The man in Celestia, the man who had proven he could do it. He said it was time. Time to raise a rebellion. Time to repeal the edict. It was time to restore men's right to magic, by force. Jiyeon listened. He remained silent. The blacksmith spoke for 10 minutes, passionately, convincingly. There was truth in his words. 120 years of injustice, generations of men deprived of their gift, generations of fathers who could not pass on to their sons what they had the right to pass on. The truth. But the method was a mistake. Jiyeon waited for silence. He stood up. He bowed. He said he was grateful for their trust. He said he would not lead the uprising. The blacksmith frowned. The former soldier placed his hand on the hilt of his knife, not threateningly, reflexively. Jiyeon continued. He said that a rebellion is war. War is destruction. Destruction is exactly what men have been accused of for 120 years. A rebellion would confirm every fear of every Lady Velmira on the continent. Men have taken up arms. We told you so. They are dangerous. The edict was right. He offered something else. He said he would rewrite their labor code for them. He said that in the current code there are 14 clauses that restrict the rights of male artisans, not based on the edict, but on outdated wording that can be challenged. Not with a sword, with a pen. The blacksmith laughed, loudly, bitterly. He said they'd waited 40 years for a warrior and a scribe had come instead. Jiyeon wasn't offended. He took a rolled-up sheet of paper out of his pocket. He laid it on the table. 3 of the 14 clauses, rewritten, with notes, pointing to specific paragraphs of the code that could be challenged through existing legal mechanisms. He had written this over 3 nights, after the hearing, when he realized the method worked not only within the academy. The blacksmith read it, for a long time. Then he passed it to the soldier. The soldier read it. He passed it to the secretary. The secretary read it the longest. Then he looked up. He asked how Jiyeon knew the craftsman's labor code. Jiyeon replied that he had read it in the library. The secretary asked which part of the library. Jiyeon replied that it was on the first floor. Just the first floor for now. The 7 men exchanged glances. The blacksmith sat down. It's tough. He said he'd give him 6 months. If in 6 months not a single point is contested, they'll return to the plan for the uprising. Jiyeon agreed. 6 months. Enough. They went their separate ways. Cassie was waiting on the tavern roof. She asked how it went. He said they gave him 6 months. She asked if that would be enough. He said he didn't know, but he'd try. They returned to the academy the same way. Roofs, cornices, the wall, the gate. The light was on in his room. Raven was sitting on the bed, legs tucked under her, a grim face. She said she knew where he'd been. Said that if he was caught outside the academy walls at night, he'd be expelled. Said he was an idiot. Cassie climbed in through the window behind him and said there were 2 idiots here. Raven looked at Cassie. Cassie looked at Raven. A spark flew between them that had nothing to do with magic. Pure, territorial animosity. 2 predators in one room. Jiyeon sat down at the table. He opened his notebook. He began to work. 10 minutes later, both of them fell silent. 20 minutes later, Raven was sitting on the windowsill, reading his notes on demonic grammar. Cassie was sitting on the floor by the wall, correcting her formulas. Silence. Working. Productive. That's how it worked. Always. Not through words. Through shared silence and shared work. By the spring of the 2nd year, Jiyeon sent his first legal petition through the Grey Hammer. 3 sections of the labor code. Challenged through the magistrate of the Central District. The magistrate reviewed them. Recognized the wording as outdated. 2 of the 3 sections were repealed. Male artisans were granted the right to use domestic magic for professional purposes. Not combat magic, domestic magic. But previously, even that had been forbidden. For the first time in 30 years, a blacksmith legally used magical fire in his forge. He didn't laugh anymore. A second letter arrived via the Grey Hammer. Short. 1 word. Continue. The 3rd year. The North. The Nameless One's breakthrough. The news came in the morning. The magic mirror in the main hall flashed red. An emergency message. The northern border has been breached. Creatures immune to the house's conventional magic have poured through the pass. 3 villages destroyed. The garrison is retreating. Celestia is dispatching a combat unit. Layla received the order first. Captain of the combat faculty, 20 senior female students, combat mages, the best in the academy. Jiyeon went to the rector, said he was going. The rector looked at him over her glasses, asked why. He's not a fighter, not a mage in the traditional sense. His mana is enough for 3 spells, and that's if he conserves it. He said he's going not as a fighter, as a field editor. If classical magic doesn't work on the nameless, then the formulas aren't working. That means there's an error in the formulas, or in the understanding of the objective. He'll find it. The rector was silent for a minute. Then she signed the authorization. The squad set out at dawn. 22 people, 21 girls, 1 Jiyeon. The journey north took 4 days, on horseback. He didn't know how to ride. By the end of the first day, everything below his waist was one solid ache. Layla rode beside him, silently. From time to time, she won his posture with a single movement of her hand. She didn't explain. She simply moved his knee or back into the correct position. By the 3rd day, he had stopped falling off. That was considered progress. Raven tagged along without permission. She showed up on the 2nd day of the journey. She rode out of the forest on a black horse she had clearly stolen from a stable. Layla wanted to send her back. Raven bared her teeth, literally. Fangs, vertical pupils, demonic blood on the surface. Layla looked at her, then at Jiyeon. He shrugged. Raven stayed. Aeon rode in the wagon train, with medicines, with instruments, with the new formula, that very one, with the added symbol. Heal them and yourself. Cassie was riding somewhere. He didn't see her, but he knew she was nearby. Shadows at the edge of his vision, rustling in the forest. The magic of her name allowed her to move so that even experienced trackers didn't notice. The northern border. The ashen wastelands began beyond the pass. Gray earth, dead trees. The air smelled of something sour, chemical. The aftermath of the War of the Tyrants. 120 years, and the land was still dead. The nameless ones waited beyond the ridge. Jiyeon saw them and understood why classical magic didn't work. They weren't creatures. They were holes, tears in the fabric of the world. Each nameless one was a place where reality had thinned to the consistency of a rag, and something from outside seeped through the hole. Not demonic, not elemental, something else. Empty. The classical magic of the houses worked with the elements. Fire, ice, wind, earth. The elements existed within the world system. The nameless ones were outside it. Hitting them with fire was like putting out a fire with kerosene. The energy passed through the hole and vanished. Or worse, the hole expanded. Jiyeon stood at the edge of the camp and watched, not at the nameless ones, at the structure around them. And he saw. Every hole had an edge. The edge was a formula, torn, incomplete, but a formula. And in that formula he recognized the handwriting. The same handwriting as in the seal of the Moon Edict. The same 12th symbol, pulsating, familiar. The nameless ones were a side effect of the edict, not metaphorically, literally. The Moon Edict didn't just ban male magic. It cut an entire layer out of the world's formula, as if all the cello parts had been torn from a symphony score. The music continued to play, but voids appeared in it. For 120 years, the voids had been accumulating, growing, and now the world was cracking at the seams. The nameless are not an invasion, they are a symptom. The world is sick. The world is sick because 120 years ago, frightened people cut a piece out of it and decided it would be safer that way. Jiyeon sat in the tent and wrote, all night long, the formula for a patch, not a cure, a patch, to stop the bleeding. A real cure would require rewriting the edict. That would take years. But a patch was needed now, today, before the Nameless reached the next village. He finished by dawn. He showed it to Layla. She didn't understand the formula, but she understood the tactic. Don't attack the holes, seal them. His formula created a temporary bond at the edge of the tear. It pulled it tight, like a stitch on a wound. Not a cure, but the bleeding stopped. Layla revised the battle plan. 20 mages, 10 attack, 10 seal. Jiyeon stood in the center and coordinated. He didn't fight, he read. Each hole had its own shape. Each required its own patch. He dictated the formulas one after another. His voice grew hoarse after an hour. After 2, he switched to a whisper. After 3, he wrote on paper and passed notes. Raven fought on the front lines. Her chaos magic, paradoxically, worked better than anyone else's. Because it wasn't tied to the elemental system. Demonic power was closer to the nature of the Nameless. Not as a weapon, as a language. She spoke to the rifts in their language, and the rifts listened. Aeon healed, non-stop. 14 hours. Her new formula, with the added symbol, allowed her to heal without collapsing. To heal and recover at the same time. For the first time in history, the healer worked without a break and didn't burn out. By evening, the holes were sealed. All 17 of them. Temporarily. The patches held. Jiyeon sat on a rock by the extinguished fire and looked out at the ash wastes. Gray earth, dead trees, 120 years without life. A symptom, not the cause. The cause lies in the chapter's archives, in the text of the edict, in that 12th symbol. He knew what he had to do next. Rewrite the edict. Not to repeal it, to rewrite it, to remove from the world's formula that void that had been carved out 120 years ago. To return the cello section to the symphony. It would take years. Perhaps decades. But now he knew the direction. And the Celestia crystal far to the south in the central tower sang louder than on the day of his arrival. The return journey took 5 days. Jiyeon rode in silence. He thought. Formulas spun in his head like the gears of a clockwork mechanism. The moon's edict, the 12th symbol, holes in the world, the Crystal of Celestia, Yoon, a name that had been scraped from all the chronicles. A man who, 120 years ago, had learned to read magic as text, just like Jiyeon, exactly like Jiyeon. He was killed, in the middle of his work, in the middle of the page, and Crystal remembered where he'd left off. They returned to the academy in the evening. Crystal sang as the squad passed through the gates, a long note, low, warm, as if someone had been waiting. Jiyeon went up to his room, sat down at the table, opened his notebook, and saw a package lying on the table, wrapped in cloth, tied with twine. No note. He unwrapped it. Inside were pages, old, yellowed. The edges were scorched. The paper was over 100 years old. The handwriting was small, neat, unfamiliar. But the notation system was familiar. Formulas. Broken down into components, with notes in the margins, with corrections, with questions. The style of an analyst. The style of a person who reads magic like text. Yoon's draft. Someone had brought it to Jiyeon's room while he was in the north. Who? How? He didn't know. But the draft lay before him. 23 pages. The last one broke off in the middle of a formula. Literally in the middle of a symbol. The pen had slipped to the right. The line went off the edge of the paper. He was killed while he was writing. Jiyeon sat and stared at that line, at that break. 120 years ago, a man sat at a table and did the same thing Jiyeon was doing. He read the world. He edited it, looking for mistakes, correcting them. And they killed him for it, because the houses were afraid, not of his power, of his understanding. He knew how they were built from the inside. He saw their formulas, their structure, their weaknesses, and they killed him for it. And then they wrote the edict that forbade all boys on the continent from learning to read, so that no one would see anymore. Jiyeon was flipping through the draft. Yoon was working on the same thing. On the edict. No. The edict didn't exist back then. Yoon was working on the Treaty of the Houses, the foundational document upon which the entire magical system of Arcadia was built. He found a mistake in it, not a superfluous clause, an intentional distortion. One of the founders of the houses had inserted an element into the treaty that redirected a portion of the world's energy into the hereditary lines of the great families. Magic flowed to everyone, but more flowed to the houses, significantly more. Not because they were more talented, because the formula was written so that they would receive more. Yoon saw this and wrote a correction. Page 23, the last one. The correction formula, unfinished, a break in the middle of the symbol. Jiyeon placed the draft on the table. He stood up. He walked to the window. Outside the window was the courtyard, darkness, stars, alien constellations. He stood there and thought. Then he sat back down. He picked up his pen. He placed the 23rd page in front of him, a line extending beyond the edge of the paper, a break. He placed his pen where Yoon had left off, and continued, symbol by symbol, phrase by phrase. Yoon wrote in a language that was 120 years old. Jiyeon translated it into modern grammar. He added to it. He corrected it. The formula was expanding. It wasn't a patch. It was a cure, a real one, a complete one, to rewrite the edict, to restore the excised layer, to close the holes not temporarily but forever, to open the flow of magic to everyone, not just for the houses, for everyone, for the boy from the village in the north who was supposed to be here instead of him. He paused. The boy from the village in the north. The crystal was calling the reader. 3 candidates in 120 years. 2 were killed in childhood. The third died a week before the exams. A random avalanche. Random. Jiyeon knew the avalanche wasn't accidental. Someone killed the boy, just as they killed Yoon, just as they killed the 2 before him. Someone was making sure the reader didn't show up. 120 years, 4 deaths, and Jiyeon was the 5th, the only one who survived. Not because he was stronger, because he came from outside, from another world, from a place the killers didn't know about. Crystal had crossed the line not out of desperation, out of calculation. He had summoned the one who couldn't be killed in advance because he didn't exist in this world until the moment of transfer. He wasn't the chosen one. He was the substitute, the 4th spare who took the field because the 3 before him were killed on the bench. Jiyeon sat in his room and looked at Yoon's draft. 23 pages of work by a man who was killed for reading. A break in the middle of a character. And for the first time since he'd been in this world, he cried. Not out of fear, not out of exhaustion, out of injustice. A boy from a northern village, 17 years old. He was supposed to be sitting in this room. He was supposed to drink tea with Sylvia on Wednesdays. He was supposed to repair spells. He was supposed to read the world. And he is dead, because someone decided that readers should not exist. Tears flowed silently. He did not wipe them away. The door opened. Sylvia. She stood in the doorway, looking at him, at the tears, at the draft on the table, at the broken line on page 23. She didn't ask what had happened. She came in, closed the door, silently sat down next to him on the floor. Not on a chair, on the floor. Next to him, shoulder to shoulder. She didn't say a word. She just sat there, a warm shoulder in the darkness. They sat like that until dawn. Not a single romantic note, just 2 people in a room, one crying, the other beside him. That was enough. In the morning, he got up, washed his face, sat down at the table, continued writing. Sylvia brought tea, oolong with pear. The pear was sliced perfectly, thinly, evenly, she had learned. He drank tea and wrote. She sat beside him and edited her bill. The 15th draft, the final one. They worked in silence, just like every Wednesday. Only today was Thursday, and that didn't change a thing. By noon, the others had arrived. Raven, through the door, for the first time without a crash, quietly. She saw his face. She saw the draft, didn't ask. Brought rolls, 4, with cinnamon, as always. Aeon, with lunch, a double portion. She looked into his eyes, red, swollen. She took a handkerchief out of her pocket, placed it on the table. Didn't try to heal him. Some wounds can't be healed with magic. Kasi, through the window, as always. She saw Yoon's draft, read the first page, turned pale. She looked at Jiyeon. He nodded. She sat down on the floor by the wall and closed her eyes. She was silent. Yuna, the last one, the quietest. She came in with a notebook. She saw 23 pages on the table. She saw the 24th one that Jiyeon was writing. She took off her glasses, put them on, took them off, said she would help. Layla didn't come in. Layla stood by the door outside, with a sword, guarding, just like Raven had guarded the night before the hearing, only now with a sword. Because Yuna's draft cost lives. 4 lives over 120 years, and they wouldn't give up a 5th. The work took months. The formula grew, page by page. Jiyeon wrote. Yuna checked the clusters. Sylvia ironed out the legal details. Raven consulted on demonic grammar. Kasi helped with the names, the true names of things. Because Yuna's formula addressed the world directly, by name, like the magic of a name, like a forbidden school that was banned not because it was dangerous, but because it was too similar to what Yuna was doing. Aeon healed them all, every evening. Exhaustion, headaches, magical overexertion. She healed herself too, every time. The symbol between the 4th and 5th ligaments worked flawlessly. Layla stood guard, day and night. When she wasn't standing at the door, she trained a combat group of 12 female students, in case someone came to take the draft. No one came. Yet. The final formula was ready by the spring of the 3rd year, 47 pages, 23 Yuna, 24 Jiyeon, 1 formula, begun by the dead, finished by the living. She wasn't revoking the edict. She was rewriting the world's formula, restoring what had been cut out. It closed the holes. It opened the streams. It changed everything. Not through rebellion, not through war, through a single correctly removed bundle, through a single added word, through a pen, not a sword. Jiyeon stood in the central tower before the crystal, alone. Night. The crystal sang, loudly, all layers at once. 26 voices, a complete score, without errors. The 3 errors Jiyeon had noticed on the first night had vanished. The crystal had corrected them itself. While Jiyeon was learning to read the world, the crystal was learning alongside him. A draft of the world, a backup copy, left behind by the first magicians. Yoon began reading it. Jiyeon continued. And now he stood before the crystal with 47 pages in his hands. The crystal asked. That very question Jiyeon had heard since the 10th chapter of his life here. Now he knew the answer. The crystal asked, Are you ready? Jiyeon placed his palm on the warm surface of the crystal. He closed his eyes. The formula began. Not through a voice, not through a pen, through contact. 47 pages. 26 voices of the crystal picked up every syllable. 1 tower hummed, then a second, a third, all 7. The academy awoke. Footsteps, shouts, light. 7 towers sang in unison. The ground beneath the foundation vibrated. To the north, above the ashen wastes, something was changing. The patches he had placed 6 months ago flared up and dissolved, not because they had broken down, because they were no longer needed. The holes were closing on their own. The world's fabric was restructuring. Slowly, like a river returning to its old bed. The layer that had been cut away 120 years ago was returning to its place. Magic flowed to everyone, not just to the houses, to everyone. Somewhere in a smithy on the outskirts of town, a blacksmith from the Greyhammer felt his hands fill with warmth. Not the everyday kind, the real kind. Somewhere in a northern village, a 10-year-old boy woke up to the sensation that the world was singing. For the first time. He didn't know what it meant, but the world was singing for him. Just as it sang for the boy who was supposed to be in Celestia. Just as it sang for Yoon. Just as it sang for everyone who had been silenced. Jiyeon stood before the crystal, his palm on the warm surface, his eyes closed. The formula was nearing completion, the final sequence, the final symbol, the final note. He removed his hand, opened his eyes. The crystal sang, softly, steadily, calmly, without question. The question was closed, the answer given. He turned around. 6 people stood at the entrance to the tower. Sylvia, silver hair, teary eyes. For the first time in 3 years, her icy gaze had completely melted away. She was smiling. Not like a president, like a human. Raven, golden eyes burning. Horns emerged through the illusion. She wasn't hiding them, for the first time. Aeon, stethoscope around her neck, a book in her hands, open. She was reading even now, but her eyes were fixed on him, not on the book. Kasi, silver symbols on her wrists glowed brightly, the magic of her name, open, legal, forever. Yuna, glasses, a pigtail, a notebook pressed to her chest, tears on her cheeks, a pen behind her ear, ready to take notes, always. Layla, sword on her back, arms crossed, standing straight, but a hint of a smile on her lips, the first one since he'd known her. 6 of them. His task force, his team, his. Jiyeon bowed, in the Korean style, deeply, back at a 90-degree angle, 3 seconds at the bottom, rise. Sylvia stepped forward first. She approached, stood in front of him, raised her hand, adjusted the collar of his white uniform. It was crooked. It was always crooked. She adjusted it every Wednesday, and every Wednesday it would slip out of place again. She adjusted it, lowered her hand, looked him in the eyes. She said one word, Wednesday. He nodded. Wednesday. 4 o'clock. The library. Tea, as always. Crystal sang softly and evenly behind him. A song of peace that was finally playing in its entirety. All the voices, all the parts. No omissions, no gaps, no cutout pages. The complete score. Just as it had been intended from the very beginning.